Hello YouTube! Today's video was inspired by an article I read recently wherein the author outlined certain lifts that they decided were bad for hypertrophy. And I see some issues with that because it has now become a trend to select and point out certain lifts, certain movements that have been done for decades and have produced great physiques and find reasons to explain why at the end of the day they're not optimal. And then the next step is the guy is going to offer you a better option, something that apparently is going to somehow have no flaws whatsoever. And it's what I call the do this, not that mentality. It works off of fear mongering because it points to you at something that now you're going to be afraid of doing because you think it's going to hurt you or you're going to waste your time. Then it offers a replacement. It's a savior option that has all of the benefits with none of the cons. The problem is that I think the people who do that, while they might have good intentions, tend to blow their loads early because while I perfectly agree that there are certain lifts that are worse for hypertrophy, it does not mean that they cannot be used for bodybuilders because with any weaknesses that they have comes certain strengths. So what I want to do today is to do the complete opposite of what the article did. I'm going to take every single lift they outlined, but instead of telling you to not do them and do something else, I'm going to explain to you exactly how to utilize what looks like cons, like bad things attached to the lift, to flip it around and turn it to your benefit. So let's get started with the first entry, the one that I'm sure you've heard a billion times, the deadlift. The deadlift is bad for hypertrophy. The deadlift doesn't have an eccentric component and therefore there is no stretch. The deadlift is too fatiguing. The stimulus to fatigue ratio is poor. You don't get as much work for certain body parts, etc., etc. All of that is true. I'm not going to argue against that. It is true. But it's only a negative if you're going to look at the deadlift a certain way. Of course, if you're going to only deadlift for posterior chain or only deadlift for upper back, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. It's something I've said in the past. It's a minimalistic approach. But the good thing is that you don't have to do that. You don't have to deadlift 2-3 times a week. You don't have to do so much volume you can barely move the next day. All of this can be shrank down. And this is why if you look at my programs, you'll find that the deadlift volume from the floor is almost nothing. It's minimal. And that is when I have you deadlift. Why? Well, it's because by doing that, you get rid of all of the negatives and you keep only the positive. Why is the deadlift bad? Because it's very fatiguing. Okay, but fatigue is also stimulus. So that way, if you reduce the amount of reps and sets you do, we can get you into a range where you'll get just enough fatigue to grow, but not enough so that it puts you in a hole. And that way, that bad thing, that negative trait of the deadlift is taken care of. You'll be able to deadlift and then do other things. Because keep in mind one thing, another flaw of the deadlift, the fact that it's apparently not focused enough, it's diffuse tonnage, it hits a ton of muscles, but none of them super hard beyond the lower back and the hamstrings, for example, or glutes, is correct. And some people look at it and say, well, therefore it's a waste of time. No. It makes the deadlift the best warm-up lift for lower body day focused on back and posterior chain. Most of the time when people talk about deadlift and fatigue, what they discuss is systemic fatigue. It's not a targeted, pinpointed muscle that is tired, it's the entire body. Why? Because you did too much of it. But if you did slightly less, you would still be fresh after that and you could keep going with other movements. This is how I program and this is how you are supposed to get it done. You open with the deadlift, you get a ton of work done at once, and then you focus on the parts of the body that you want to see grow. And that way they blow up. This is a mindset that requires the ability to not look at the deadlift like a primary movement. If you're a bodybuilder, you're going to do something that powerlifters are going to recoil at. They're going to take a cross out of their little baggies full of chalk, and they're going to say Vade retro satanas to me because I'm telling you right now that the best way to use the deadlift as a bodybuilder is to treat it as an accessory. Yes, that's right. Treat it as an accessory. As an accessory to what? Your other pulls, your other hip hinges. Case in point, Romanian deadlifts trump deadlifts for hypertrophy 100%. Better stimulus to fatigue ratio, and there is a stretch. It's focused on the stretch. But guess what? If you only do Romanian deadlifts, you will quickly find out, especially if you do them in higher rep ranges, that you will not be able to perform and progress as much as you would like. What is the solution to that? More Romanian deadlifts? That scarcely works. What you need is to find a way to push progression and get stronger on the limiting factor of the Romanian deadlift, which is the positive, not the negative. The negative is the easy part of the Romanian deadlift, but the part that makes you grow the most is getting the bar up before another negative. That is the tough part. And guess what trains that? Deadlifts, because they're focused on the positive. And just like that, you took something with a ton of problems and you paired it with another lift that complements it. And by treating the deadlift as the accessory, it fixes all of the problems of the second. And now you can keep growing. Most of your volume will come from the Romanian deadlift, and the deadlift itself will just be used as a way to be more intense and train the positive portion only. And just like that, you are still able to deadlift. And this is a problem that I've seen discussed a ton, and that comes back with the second item on this list, which is the barbell row. I myself have spoken against the barbell row for the same reasons that many people mention. The fact that it stresses the lower back, and on top of that, it makes for poor upper back isolation. Many people, they do barbell rows and they don't realize how much they use their legs. So if you're going to use the barbell row like you would use a deadlift for total upper back growth, you are going to be very disappointed. How do we fix that? How do we still do rows? Well, it's very simple. You look at the row for what it was intended to be, which is a compound movement. It was always supposed to hit the entire body. You cannot then recoil and say it's a bad thing. It's what the lift was supposed to do. And how do we treat compound movements as a bodybuilder? Well, we put them to good use to push progression and grow overall to get as much tonnage as possible. So what do we do next? Well, you're going to start opening sessions with barbell rows, aka you're going to start treating them like you would a deadlift. Of course, with higher reps and higher volume overall, because they are less fatiguing than deadlift, but it's something that I've done in my programs in the past, and I know that people have enjoyed it. So many times I see people who program the barbell row again like a lat pull down. So you'll see squats, then a heavy hip hinge, then barbell rows. Of course, you're not going to be able to perform. Look at where you place the rows. Open with your rows. Give rows the priority they deserve. And just like that, the lower back stress and the poor isolation stop being a problem, because you'll get overall tonnage, and then you can move on to more isolated movements that take away the lower back and take away the legs. Treat the barbell row for what it is, which is a full body movement. Now for the number 3, we have an example that many people like to take when they point out at a lift that is bad for hypertrophy because of its dangerous nature, and that is the good morning. Times and times again, I see people who say that it's not worth it to do them, or if you do them, you have to do them with baby weight, 135 or 225. There was a guy a few years ago that said, never put more than 2 plates on the good morning. This is arbitrary, and it should immediately tell you that there is a problem with that mindset, because it's nonsense. The good morning is a great movement for the hamstrings, glutes, and lower back, and the upper back. Because yes, there is weighted stretch, you resist with the upper back. That is especially true, of course, if you use a safety squat bar, which I always encourage you guys to use if you do good mornings. It is the absolute best choice. It feels the best. It is the best strength curve, etc., etc. So now, how do we turn this apparently very dangerous lift into something worth using? Because at first glance, of course, the good mornings tend to look like they're hard to push in terms of intensity because you apparently don't want to load them too much, and are dangerous on the lower back. Let's start with the last item. Why would a good morning be dangerous on the lower back? A good morning is a hip hinge, just like any other hip hinges. Unless you tell me that all hip hinges are bad, they're not dangerous. Is it maybe the bar placement? Well, of course, the bar placement is mid-back, so it's away from the hips. But so is a stiff leg deadlift. If we're going to say that every single hip hinge that has the weight and the center of gravity away from the hips, which is the main mover, is bad, then stiff leg deadlifts are bad, because you lengthen the torso in order to create more moment arm. But it's not the case at all. Meaning that there is no such thing as a dangerous lift, first and foremost, and 2, that it's up to you to adapt so as not to create problems. Case in point, many people when they do good mornings, they go flat like this. So they want their back to be parallel to the floor. There is nothing wrong with that, but you don't have to do that. Again, I blame the form police for this. I blame the form police for the lack of popularity of certain movements. Because of course, if you standardize the range of motion of good mornings to this angle, you're going to get people hurt because it's not necessary to go that deep on good mornings. I encourage people to go at that degree. You don't have to face the floor. You can just enter a degree of hip hinge that feels comfortable. And if you tell me that's not good enough for hamstrings, then again, most pulls from the floor are not good for hamstrings because you don't pull with your back like this on most pulls. You pull with your back like this, the hamstrings are still being recruited. So listen to your body. And then when it comes to the lower back in particular and the stress, as I said, if you use higher rep ranges and reps in reserve, there will be no problems. Yesterday I did good mornings with, I think there was 245, there was 255 on the bar. And I did 8, 7, and 6 reps with 2 reps in reserves every time. Am I broken in two? Does my lower back hurt today? Absolutely not. I feel perfectly fine. The only thing that is tired is my hamstrings. Why? I use the proper bar and I use the proper form. And just like that, I can utilize good morning and I can push intensity. I have more than 2 plates on the bar and I'm not dead. There is no such thing as a movement that cannot be pushed for progressive overload. That is nonsense. Now let's move at number 4, a lift that I don't hold in my heart because I've never done it in my life, and that is the Smith squat. Now, this is one that I tell novices to stay away from. I've seen too many noobs who jump on the Smith machine because it's a guided path, a guided barbell. They're afraid of looking ridiculous under free weight. Be ridiculous. We all have been ridiculous in the past. You have to learn proprioception. You have to learn how to move through space and to develop the neurological pathways. The Smith machine is reserved for people who have mastered the compounds. After that, you can use them. But it is rightly said that the issue with the Smith is that the bar is still fixed and therefore it's an unnatural motion. Meaning that depending on the way you're built, you might not be built for the machine. It might put you in an awkward angle. You can't really move around the bar. You can't modify the way the bar moves through space, etc., because it goes up and down, up and down. And this is when I tell you that most weaknesses of lifts can become strengths if you know how to approach them, because all of the people who love training their legs and who use the Smith machine in the comments will tell you that this is exactly what makes the Smith so good. It's the fact that you do not have to balance the bar on your back, meaning you can put your legs all the way in front and your feet all the way in front with your butt and your spine underneath the bar, which you would never be able to do in a normal squat because you would just fall back, and you can squat that way. And guess what it does? It reinforces quad activation, lowers the strain on the lower back, and also heightens the activation of the glute for certain people. And just like this, you have a squat pattern that is deloaded for the posterior chain, deloaded for actual loading in general, and can be a lifesaver for people with back injuries or people who just want more leg volume. If you don't have a hack squat, if you don't have a belt squat machine, this can be used. So again, keep an eye open for fear mongering, because in every fear that you have is an opportunity for you to grow. Now, for number 5, I can already see my brother, Bold Omniman, in the comment, and all of the big mover enthusiasts screaming in rage, because it is going to be about the upright row. This one has been, for some reason, highly contested on YouTube Fitness for as long as I can remember. And again, it's fear-mongering 100% because internal rotations are just natural movements that the shoulders do. It is true that there is a risk of impingement, but it's true for every single press and every single movement. And yet this one is always pointed out. Why? Well, I think that is because there is some truth to it, in the sense that the lift in itself can be dangerous if handled by idiots. And it's true with all of these lifts, actually. If you have 2 IQ points to rub together, you will know how to handle them. Only idiots get hurt on the good morning. Only idiots think they're going to get a massive jacked upper back from barbell rows alone. Only idiots think they're going to be able to be just doing only deadlifts and get big legs from that. Same for the upright row. The issue with this lift is that people load it too much. And again, it's because they have big mover mindset, which is paradoxical. Is that they're so used to putting plates on plates for the compounds that when they finally move to isolation, they just don't feel like moving baby weight, I guess. And it's a mindset I've seen people do a ton, where they always gravitate towards lift where they can move the most weight. That doesn't mean that they're good lifts. It just means that they're more advantageous for you. Sometimes, as a bodybuilder who wants to grow all over, you have to put yourself at a disadvantage. That is sort of the point. Who cares about the weight you lift? Even if it's baby weight, if it is challenging and you go to failure within a relatively low rep range, you are going to grow. And the same goes for the upright row. So don't be afraid to load low. I've scarcely seen anyone do upright rows with more than 130 pounds, because you don't need to. And if you stick to ranges or rep ranges from 10 to 15, your shoulders are going to be perfectly fine. You're not going to do that and the shoulder is going to snap in half. It's simply not how it works. Internal rotations can be trained and they can be developed with proper loads. And then on top of that, you also have the poor progressive overload. Well, yes, of course, you will not be able to progress as fast on an upright row as you would an overhead press, no duh. But it's because there are less muscles involved and it's a more delicate movement. So treat it as is. I was going to say you wouldn't complain if your curls didn't grow as fast as your bench. Some people do. But if you're smart, you'll understand that if you gain 5, 10, 15 pounds on your curls, that means a ton, especially if you do high rep ranges. It means that the muscle is absolutely growing. So stop looking at the upright row like a compound. Look at it like a lateral raise, for example, and treat it as such. You would not do a 3 rep max on the lateral raise, swinging the thing around like a baboon. So do the same for the upright row, and it's a perfectly usable lift. After that, we have the rack pull. Now, the rack pull has a bad reputation because many people do it with a very short range of motion, they damage equipment, yada, yada, yada. It's that old 2016 discussion that has been just completely overblown out of proportion because, again, it's like people think there's only one way to do a lift. Yes, you can do a super partial with a block pull. Yes, of course. But you can also do a normal rack pull from below the knee, and that is a perfectly fine lift. Again, there's not only one way to practice a movement, there's not only one way to approach the programming of a movement. Most times when a movement is dangerous or bad, you just need to change the way you approach it. So for the rack pull, the quote-unquote problems of it are the fact that it's an isometric upper back movement, which is correct. I have come to understand with the years that isometric stretch for the upper back and the traps in particular is highly underrated. So maybe you don't even need the other portion of the movement. And then it's the fact that it apparently requires a ton of plates. Again, I have a very simple solution for that. Pull from below the knee and then cheat the movement by holding the weight at the end of the last rep. This is how I do mine. I do from below the kneecap, which for some people is harder than from the floor. It is for me. I control the negative, explode back up in a touch and go style, and then at the last rep, I hold until I cannot hold anymore. I don't need to use a ton of plates. I use even less than for my deadlift. It feels tremendous for the upper back, especially the traps, and it also carries over to every pull you have because the range of motion is not that distinct. Now for 7, we have a lift that is not too contested, that not many people do actually. I've scarcely seen anyone do it in a commercial gym, and that is the Landmine Press. And apparently the issue with the Landmine Press is that it's unstable. I've never understood that argument. Yes, it's unstable because you're on your legs. Every single movement is like this. If we're going to get rid of all movements that require core rigidity and lower back activation and lower body activation to stabilize, we're going to just end up sitting doing lat pull downs forever. So I think that's not receivable. And then we have also the fact that it is poor chest and shoulder hypertrophy practice. Why? Well, because it's not strictly a vertical press, but it's not an horizontal press, it's a little bit in the middle. The issue is that you also have the incline press that's in the same bag, which is also a good lift. The problem would be if you only use that movement for those two muscle groups and you thought you were going to get huge. No, it's an hybrid lift. It gives you a bit of both. So what do you use it for? To get a bit of both. It only becomes a bad lift if you pin press, I said pin press, landmine press against a bench press or a landmine press against an overhead press. Now, of course, yes, because one is much more specific and gives you much more tonnage for one area, and the other one is more diffused. But that means that you can use it as an accessory again. use movements as accessories to push the primary movements that give you the most volume. And you will find that it can also prevent injuries. The good thing about the Landmine Press, and it's something I realized recently, I was in the forest away from the gym, and I fashioned, and I say I fashioned, in reality I found a log on the floor that was exactly the right weight and the right length for me to bring to my chin and do Landmine Press with. And it felt tremendous on the shoulders and the triceps, and so I did that for a few days. Now I had to leave the forest at some point, as we all do, and the log is waiting for me to come back because I actually marked my path in the forest, so I know exactly where it is. And it felt great. I think it would be a great complement for an overhead press training because it's a different angle. And on top of that, remember what I said about the Smith machine? It's sort of the same thing when you press with both hands. The bar can only go up. Right? It can only go up because both of your shoulders and your hands are pushing it upward, and it's in the axis of the shoulder. Gravity disallows you from pushing straight like this or behind your head. Thank God, because it would fall and lay on your neck and you would die. It's not the same with the Landmine Press. You can play with gravity because you have more angles, more range of motion, and more freedom. Freedom is a good thing if you know what you're doing. And then for the last lift, a lift that I also don't necessarily encourage people to do because it's redundant, we have the planks. Now, the issue with the plank is that it's hard to progress on because once you get to a certain point, of course, you need someone to sit on your back, you need someone to put plates on your back, you can't do it by yourself, so you are limited in that aspect. And then there's also no stretch. I say it's redundant because it's true that if there is no stretch, you're going to lose on some hypertrophy, and on top of that, you already get the stretch when you brace on compound movements. But this does not make it a bad exercise. It just means that you are going to use it on days when you don't brace that much. Case in point, upper body days. Look at all of my programs. All of the planks I make you guys do, it's always on upper body days. There is a reason for that. Know the weaknesses of the lifts, adapt, and suddenly they are not weaknesses anymore. And another advice I have for people who enjoy planks but who are too strong for it, do it at the end of the workout. And do it in a giant set circuit and tell me how strong you are. It's not going to be as easy anymore. People who can do it with 45s on their backs, 245s, people on their back, as the circuit progresses and because you're so tired, you're going to find out that you're going to gas out much faster. And that way you can keep doing your planks without worrying so much about progression because some lifts can just help other movements progress without you obsessing about them and their progressive overload factors because again, they become accessory to the progression overall and not the main factor or pushers of hypertrophy and therefore also growth themselves. And that is what is going to conclude this video. So I hope I was able to shift your mindset a bit on bad lifts for hypertrophy. One could say, well, if the lift is so, delicate and so needy in terms of approach and we have to modify it, why exactly can't we just dump it, right? For example, why deadlifts, if you said that Romanian deadlifts are better? Well, it's because by themselves, Romanian deadlifts are inferior to a combo of deadlifts and Romanian deadlifts. See, this is what's so important to keep in mind. Falling back into a minimalistic routine and a minimalistic approach to training will fail you times and times again. Deadlifts by themselves as the main pusher of hypertrophy are bad. Romanian deadlifts by themselves for the same reason are bad. Combined together, they make a ton more sense, and the same goes for every single lift. Now, if it doesn't work and you've actually tried, honestly tried, then you can just move on. Then it's fine because you have attempted it. You have observed the lift and you have decided by your empirical experience that it is simply not worth it for you. And this is when you can take a lift and dump it in the exercise graveyard, a concept I'm going to explain to you at some point. It is very important for bodybuilding. It's part of subjectivity, but the issue is when this subjectivity becomes an objectivity shared by the group, where everyone collectively points out a lift and says, oh, it's bad. Then you stop them and you ask, okay, why is it bad? Either they don't know, or they're going to spout the reasons I told you, but they've never considered that these things were actually strengths. So now that you have your eyes open, I hope you're going to be able to make use of these lifts to get jacked. For myself, I'm going to leave you with that. Have a good night.